the Chancellor, His Excellency, Dr. Thabo Mbeki, the Vice Chancellor and Principal of the University of South Africa, Professor Puleng Linkabula. I'm acting on a behalf this morning to the professor that we are inaugurating this morning, Professor Ashley van Niekerk, his family, members, spouse, friends, and loved ones, members of the College of Management, members of the College Management, the College of Human Sciences and staff, and in particular, the members of the Institute for Social and Health Sciences, the Executive Dean of the College of Human Sciences, esteemed professors gracing this lecture this morning, academic and administrative colleagues, UNISA students and visiting students from other higher education institutions, supporters, funders, UNISA alumni, distinguished guests, boys and girls, and most importantly to you, Prof. van Niekerk, the celebrity of the day, Sanbonan, Molweni, Trebelang, Avuan, Da, Dumelang, Pemore, good morning. All protocol is observed. My name is Tenjiwe Meyiwa, the Vice Principal for Research, Postgraduate Studies, Innovation and Commercialization. It's a long name. We just shorten it by saying it's Research and Innovation. Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, good morning and welcome to Prof. van Niekerk's inaugural lecture. Prof. van Niekerk is affiliated with the Institute of Health and Social Sciences that is celebrating this year. They're celebrating 35 years, and I'm very pleased to have been part of the journey of the Institute for Social and Health Sciences. Please allow me to also acknowledge the Executive Dean of the College, in particular, Prof. Masemula, Khomotso Masemula, and the college leadership that is present this morning. With specific reference, I must actually say, because it's a big year for ISHS, to Prof. Mohammed Sadat, who's the head of the Institute for Social and Health Sciences. I also would like to acknowledge and welcome Prof. Himla Sudel, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Academy of Science of South Africa. Prof. Sudel serves as a respondent during this installation this morning. We thank you, Prof. Himla, for heeding our call. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, in these turbulent, challenging times, globally, within the country, South Africa, and of course within our sector, our identity and relevance ought to attest to what we are about. And the two needs to match, that is our identity and relevance as a university. And for us, what that means is that our identity as a university that's on the African soil and that's seasoning itself with African issues has to contribute to what we refer to in one of our mantras, the service of humanity. We are a university that shapes futures, hence the importance of the content of this inaugural address we are due to listen to you this morning. As an institution, while we are bound to produce graduates and research, we are also very much committed to do so, asking hard questions. For us at UNISA, it will not be sufficient as a university, actually for any other university I must add, to produce just good research. We must produce research that is sensitive to the wrongs, the suffering, and the injustices of society. And we want to be doing so, ready to put our shoulder to the wheel by actively participating in correcting those ills. I'm giving this context because of this address we're having this morning. That's very apt to what I'm making reference to. For us at UNISA, we, however, are committed to the fact that we cannot just produce graduates, produce research without a cadre of the professorate of Prof. Ashley van Niekerk's kind. It is for that reason that we as an institution, occasions like this one, inaugural lectures, we take very seriously. And Prof. Ash's lecture is one of such. As we note that this is a very proud moment, we're celebrating, we celebrate every academic that reflects one of our pinnacles of academic achievement, being a full professor. We also are, as a university, taking a moment where we say, through Prof. Ash's inaugural lecture, his work, we are swelling our professorate. It's a moment of joy, it's a moment of celebration, and it is responding to our aspirations. We're glad that you've just added, confirmed by this address this morning, additional expertise to our portfolio and to the cadre of who we regard and refer to as full professors. You may be asking, what's a full professor relative to just a professor? A full professor is a colleague who's mentored, who's graduate students, who's produced, who's reproduced good research, who work postgraduate students on the graduation stage, having produced good research themselves. It's somebody who raises funds, brings money to the university to ensure we sustain research of his, her own, but also of the university. It is somebody who brings about stability for us. Hence, we celebrate them. Hence, we celebrate Prof. Ash this morning. I am calling upon you, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, to be good and drop comments on the comments chat and congratulate Prof. van Niekerk, but also post questions if you want to, that he will respond to through his further research and make some suggestions and recommendations on his work. And of course, his work is so apt and pertinent. His address this morning is entitled Energy Impoverishment and Bans, the case of an expedited, safe, and inclusive energy transition in South Africa. You couldn't have gotten better than that. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm of the view that this lecture reverberates the Greenpeace Africa stance. Like the Greenpeace Africa always do, they just informed us through their publications a few weeks ago that this year, by July 29, 2021, globally as a humanity, we collectively used up all of Earth's resources for the year, just beyond being mid-year. So what Prof. van Niekerk does in this address, he furthers that stance of the Greenpeace Africa by lamenting and providing international and emerging local evidence, and with those kind of resources to which Greenpeace Africa refer, is saying they should be not just only safe, they must be cost effective, they must be healthy, and they must actually be a social justice endorsement to what Prof. Ashley refers to as the impoverished, the energy impoverished. I like that reference. Ashley then further says that we need to support the call that he is making through this address to expedite forms of energy that are modernized, are inclusive, and therefore that are taking cognizance of what he refers to as the energy impoverished. I don't want to spoil this lecture by going too much into detail. I shall do so. Ladies and gentlemen, in terms of today's proceedings this morning, this is what's going to happen. Professor Masemula, the Executive Dean of the college to which Prof. Niekerk belongs, shall come to the podium to introduce Prof. Niekerk. And then once he's done that, Prof. Niekerk will come to the podium to let us through his thoughts of the title that is chosen to engage us with this morning. After he's done so, we will then get Prof. Sudial, who is the CEO that I've introduced earlier. Thank you, Prof. Sudial, for heeding the call to respond to this lecture. She will come with a response without my coming to the podium for further announcement. And at this juncture, I now invite Prof. Masemula to come to the podium and present Prof. Ashley van Niekerk to us. Thank you.
Madam Vice Chancellor Professor Puleni Nkabula, Madam Deputy Vice Chancellor for Research, Innovation and Commercialization, Professor Tenji Meyiwa, members of the Senate Management of the University, members of the College of Human Sciences Management, members of the student body of the university, friends, ladies and gentlemen, I greet you. Today, we celebrate the zenith of scholarship of one of our own, Professor Ashley van Niekerk, whose combined record of accomplishment has earned him a special place in the university community as a full professor. It is incumbent upon the Office of the Deanery of College of Human Sciences to acknowledge such great meritorious achievement that has been sustained over the years. What we see in the record of accomplishment of Professor Ashley van Niekerk is worth celebrating today. And as we look at the combined record of his outputs and his activism in the community, social relevance, and this accomplishment of what many people wouldn't have outside of scholarship, we are really proud as the College of Human Sciences. Today, ladies and gentlemen, Madam Vice Chancellor, I have the singular honor to be able to present the abbreviated CV of a distinguished scholar in Ashley van Niekerk, who was recently appointed professor at the UNISA Institute for Health Sciences, or IHS, from December 2020. He was previously the Deputy Director of the South African Medical Research Council and UNISA's Violence, Injury, and Peace Research Unit from the year 2016 to 2020, and was previously a Professor Extraordinarius with the ISHS from the year 2010 to the year 2020, and a past adjunct professor of research with Monash University's Injury Research Institute from the year 2012 to 2016. Ashley was born in Salt River in Cape Town and attended Zonnebloem Primary School in District 6 and thereafter Spesborner Senior Secondary School in Athlone, from which he matriculated in the year 1984. He pursued his university studies firstly at the University of Cape Town, completing a Bachelor of Arts with Psychology and Sociology as majors in the year 1988. And then at the University of Western Cape, completing a Bachelor of Arts Honors in Psychology in 1990 and a Master of Arts in Clinical Psychology in 1996. This was followed by a PhD in Social Medicine, which he completed at the Swedish Karolinska Institute in the year 2007. His research career was initiated at the University of Western Cape's Department of Psychology, where he worked from the year 1993 to 1997, where his early research interests in child violence, injury, and safety were founded and later to be consolidated further after he first joined the UNISA Institute of Social and Health Sciences in 1997 all the way to the year 2001. This affiliation with the Institute has since been maintained when in 2001 it partnered with the South African Medical Research Council around the Violence, Injury and Peace Research Unit, and where Ashley was appointed from 2001 to 2020. Professor Ashley van Niekerk's research portfolio has since embedded critical socio-psychological, public health, and social justice understandings of the multi-layered nature of injury, its causation, and prevention. He has led national and international collaborative research on the complex determinants of childhood burns and on innovative socially driven prevention and psychological recovery support measures. He has, with his long-standing UNISA IHS collaboration, been involved in the development of national evidence-based injury and violence prevention policy for South Africa, and he has led the development of provincial policies for the prevention of fire and burn injuries and the promotion of water safety. Amongst his notable achievement is Prof. van Niekerk's appointment by the Ministry of Health to its National Health Research Committee in 2013 to 2017, his editorship of the Journal African Safety Promotion, the Journal of Injury and Violence Prevention, which has been recently renamed Social and Health Sciences, and an associate editorship at the Journal Injury Prevention, which he took up from the year 2018 to date. He is very well published and has supervised a number of PhD and MA candidates. Prof. van Niekerk is also a long-standing member of the board of the Child Accident Prevention Foundation of South Africa, was on the Psychological Society of South Africa's Science of Society Standing Committee in the years 2016 to 2018, is on the UNISA College of Human Sciences Ethics Committee, which joined last year and is still sitting on it, and on Life Saving South Africa's Scientific Committee, a body which he joined in 2019 to date. He was notably a recipient of the South African Medical Research Council's Silver Award for Research Excellence in 2017. And so, ladies and gentlemen, it is against this background that I have the singular honor as the Executive Dean of the College of Human Sciences to formally hear out Professor Ashley van Niekerk's nuggets of wisdom, his breakthrough scholarship, embodied such as it is, Madam Vice Chancellor, or in the inaugural lecture, which is aptly entitled Energy Impoverishment and Burns, the case for an expedited, safe, and inclusive energy transition in South Africa. Madam Vice Chancellor, I present to you Professor Ashley van Niekerk. I thank you.
Thank you, professors, Professor Meyiwa and Masemole. I would like to acknowledge with gratitude the University of South Africa's leadership, in particular, our Vice Chancellor and Principal, Professor Puleng Lenkabula, the Vice Principal Research, Postgrad Studies, Innovation and Commercialization, Professor Tenjiwe Mayiwa, the Vice Principal, Teaching, Learning, Community Engagement and Student Support, Professor Veronica McKay, the Dean of the College of Human Sciences, Professor Khomotso Masamole, and the Head of the Institute of Social and Health Sciences, Professor Mohammed Sidat. My thanks for the visionary commitment that UNISA has made to its humanizing and compassionate research vision. I wish to thank all of my colleagues in the Institute for Social and Health Sciences, an institute that is 35 years old this year, and that has been a wonderful place to grow and be inspired. I want to acknowledge all of my colleagues from the community safety promotion, the social justice, and the energy safety fields, in particular, Dr. David Kimemia, and again, Professor Sidat from the Institute, for the many collaborations we have shared towards energy justice. Professor Himla Sudial, the CEO of ASIF, the Academy of Science of South Africa, my sincere thanks for your reflections on this address and your championship of a multidisciplinary and diverse science platform in South Africa. To the members of the university community, my dear colleagues, my comrades, and my friends from other institutions, community, and public agents in the social justice space where I've worked, and my dear family and friends who have shared my journey, to you all, my heartfelt thanks for your support, your nurturance, your inspiration, and the solidarity that you have offered over the years. Colleagues and friends, it is a great honor and a privilege for me to be able to deliver this address. The presentation on energy impoverishment and burns provides a case for an expedited, safe, and inclusive energy transition in South Africa. It highlights current health, human rights, and energy justifications in support of a transition that is responsive to South Africa's energy poor. The access to energy is a matter of life and death for many in our country, but especially for those who live on South Africa's economic and social margins. Burns or thermal injury is a striking and at times highly visible indicator of this lack of energy access, often referred to as energy poverty. Burns are common in South Africa, with about 100,000 injuries every year and about 2,000 deaths. They are disproportionately manifest in energy impoverished communities, in particular informal settlements. These communities depend on solid fuels such as wood and coal, and flammable hydrocarbons such as paraffin as their main source of energy. Because of cost considerations, they use inefficient and often tragically unsafe combustion appliances. In this presentation, I describe firstly evidence from the health field. There is a human rights case that has also been made, and then finally evidence from the energy sector. The second part of the presentation maps out broad parameters for an expedited energy transition, specifically for the energy impoverished. The latter comprises a call which argues that the transition to safer energy carriers and equipment is a national imperative, and that it, the proposed transition, would reduce the vulnerability of energy poor households, leading to better health and welfare for South African citizens. Let me start with the energy poverty problem. Energy poverty reflects a reliance on poor, inefficient, and unsafe energy modes. Energy poverty is a recognized impediment to health, to social and economic well-being. Energy impoverishment is especially manifest in informal urban settlements where precarious home structures, concentrations of combustibles, congested neighborhood environments, and limited access to healthcare compound the vulnerability to negative health outcomes. In 2012, the Department of Energy categorized 47% of households as energy poor, based on the expenditure of at least 10% of income on energy. In 2018, this amounted to about 600,000 households, at least 2 million people who were considered in extreme energy deprivation, with reliance on paraffin for their domestic energy needs. These families face disproportionate risks to their health. They experience greater exposure to air pollution, to poisoning, and to burn injury. The consequences of these can be devastating. On this slide, you can see a snapshot of recent fires. There was one a few months ago in Booysens, Masipulele, just outside of Cape Town, and a number of others. And the widespread devastation is apparent and clear. South African studies using either nationally representative household energy consumption surveys or hospital and injury surveillance data indicate that the energy sources responsible for the majority of incidents are paraffin, firewood, and candles. In South Africa, 53% of these fires are as a result of paraffin, and 30% are ignited by candles. The households that use paraffin are reported to manifest substantially higher risks for injury through fires, but also through ingestion, intake, or toxic fume inhalation, as compared to those houses that do not use paraffin. The national distribution of these injuries by the specific energy sources does require further examination. In these events, however, it is widely reported that paraffin stove explosions are indicated as the most common or amongst the most common immediate cause of such fires. This is reported by South African, but also by Kenyan, Nigerian, Egyptian, and Indian hospital studies. In South Africa, many of these flame injuries are the result from the 5,000 shack fires that emergency services respond to every year. In South Africa, fire incidents are therefore common, especially in informal settlements. These are environments that in general have high risks for a widespread runaway fire after a single accidental ignition. These settlements, as many of you will know, consist of shacks, informally constructed dwellings that are closely built together, made of flammable materials. Increasingly, in recent years, so-called backyard shacks, or informal structures built adjacent to a formal dwelling, have become very common. These fires may be exacerbated by the immediate flammable material, congested internal spatial arrangements, and the storage of paraffin or other combustibles to set off a more widespread and devastating community conflagration. So factors that relate to the physical environment are highly important. Factors relating to equipment use are pertinent as well. Despite South Africa's promulgation of paraffin stove standards in 2006 and subsequent campaigns to develop improved appliances through, for example, the Paraffin Safety Association of South Africa, the quality of these appliances have not been effectively monitored or enforced, with underperforming technology, even when SABS approved the current norm. The third set of factors relate to people, and factors that have been flagged as of significance within the physical environment of a small home in a congested community and using inappropriate and poorly constructed equipment are factors such as the following: where children use paraffin appliances, where there is risky stove use. Often, stove operation can be quite complicated, and when parts come off and come apart, there might be a tendency to reattach them, posing a risk to the user. Other risks are when children are left alone in the home, when there are a number of children in a small house that increase the crowdedness and the likelihood of a child bumping into a stove. And then lastly, levels of knowledge about stove use and about burn treatment are all human factors that exacerbate the risk of a paraffin fire or scalding injuries from cooking on poorly constructed paraffin stoves. This is not the only danger that paraffin poses. Paraffin is also, by its nature, easily decanted, by its distribution, less so by its nature. It is easily decanted, and this is a significant ingestion hazard that has still not been adequately resolved. Paraffin ingestion or poisoning affects about 3.6% of all paraffin-using households, with children and intoxicated individuals the main victims. There have been estimates of as many as 46 to 93,000 children alone that ingest paraffin each year, 40 to 50% of whom may develop chemical pneumonia, with fatalities estimated at up to 2% of cases. Overall, paraffin may account for about 60% of all pediatric poisoning in South Africa. Beyond ingestion or the drinking of paraffin, emissions of paraffin may also impair lung function and increase the susceptibility to infectious illness, including tuberculosis, which is of course critical in South Africa. It can also increase susceptibility to other illnesses such as asthma and cancer. There may also be central nervous system effects to acute and chronic exposure to paraffin that includes irritability, restlessness, ataxia, drowsiness, convulsions, coma, and even death. The recent South African research thus indicates that the health consequences of energy impoverishment in general, and in particular paraffin use, may be widespread, especially within the country's most impoverished communities. In general, the survivors of burn and poisoning injuries, especially those resulting in hospitalization, so serious injuries, may suffer immediate and long-term physical, psychological, and socio-economic consequences. Those that survive burns may still be faced with permanent scarring, in some cases with limited physical functionality brought about through what are called contractures around joints. Those with visible, cosmetically disfiguring scars commonly report social stigmatization from strangers, but also peers, and with some studies also indicating even family members. The immediate health consequences may endure as a result of the immune suppression after the surge of stress hormones and inflammatory responses to the burn wound, with burn survivors over time reporting, and this is from a very recent Australian study, reporting higher risks for cancer, for cardiovascular disease, for nervous system disorders, diabetes, musculoskeletal disorders, gastrointestinal disease, infections, and anxiety and depression over time. The psychological outcomes reported in the immediate aftermath, of course, may also persist over time, with many individuals reporting PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, depression and anxiety, as I've mentioned, and sleep disturbances, aggressiveness, disturbed self-esteem, and distressing memories and recollections of the burn event. The economic impact is also likely significant. Burn care is in general very expensive. The individual hospitalization and treatment for serious burns in South Africa is estimated at between 103,000 to 154,000 per patient. It is estimated that 490 million rand is spent to care for those with just paraffin burns. In addition, 180 million rand is annually lost in devastated structures. Indirect costs such as lost wages, the prolonged care for those with physical injuries, other health outcomes, and psychological trauma all contribute to the socioeconomic impact, entrapping many of the individuals, the affected families, and their communities in ongoing poverty. Towards solutions, the second part of my presentation. There has been international mobilization and demonstration of alternative, safe, and clean energy. Firstly, both international and South African agencies have recognized the overall adverse health and social impact of energy impoverishment, and declared the universal access to safe, affordable, sustainable, and modern energy a global priority. This has been endorsed by the United Nations through its 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development as Sustainable Development Goal number 7. SDG 7 calls for universal access to safe and sustainable energy, a crucial point around which other social, economic, and well-being domains intersect. The UN has recognized that SDG 7 is interconnected and arguably a prerequisite for other SDGs, including the eradication of poverty, that is to say SDG 1, good health and well-being, of course, SDG 3, and sustainable cities and communities, SDG 11, but also others, such as gender equality, all of which are argued to in some way be either interconnected or dependent on the achievement of universal access to energy. South African institutions, such as the Human Rights Commission, have also recognized that the access to safe energy in South Africa is critical, arguing that it is a key aspect of social justice and thus a constitutionally protected environmental and basic human right. The rise of modern energy alternatives. This international and increasing national recognition aligns with recent evidence from countries socioeconomically very similar to South Africa that show that energy poverty can be mediated through policies that substitute hazardous fuels with cleaner and safer alternatives. Electricity and LPG, liquefied petroleum gas, are most recognized as clean, safe, and sustainable domestic energy carriers with the potential for large-scale rollout. In the case of South Africa, other clean fuel options may include ethanol, solar, and biogas. Internationally, electricity is a preferred carrier, mostly due to its versatility, its ease of use, and the unrivaled cleanness at the point of use. Based on this, governments have prioritized large-scale electrification projects with the aim of achieving universal electricity coverage. South Africa has also made significant efforts in this regard, with about 90% of households now connected to the grid, from a low of about 35% 3 decades ago. However, effective electricity access is hampered by unscheduled power outages due to grid constraints and unaffordability, especially in low-income communities. These limitations cause on-grid households to maintain or revert to the use of paraffin and other so-called dirty fuels. Electricity is therefore not a panacea for all energy needs, and thus the need for alternative, safe, and clean energy carriers. It is important to note that other fuels that have emerged in recent times may require further field and safety investigation. The promising ones appear to be methanol. It is a new entrant in the South African energy market, and it is yet to diffuse nationally. Safe fuel packaging in child-proof containers are going to be required, and draft standards of stove manufacture have just recently been completed. Ethanol is also a promising technology. It offers a safe fuel distribution and handling system backed with well-resolved appliances. It is not available in South Africa at the moment, but it may be worth consideration. Paraffin is being proposed by some for continued use, despite the noted dangers. It will require a comprehensive cost-benefit analysis study, the further investment in development of safer stoves, the addition of bitterants and colorants to the fuel, and far stronger enforcement of regulations for fuel packaging, stove manufacture, and distribution. Of the clean fuel options, however, LPG has increasingly been argued as one of the better practical replacements for paraffin, owing to better performance in terms of technological and usability attributes. The use of LPG and electricity, each deployed according to relative advantages, is internationally recommended as a community health prevention strategy, especially in the recent resource-poor settings. A best practice for large LPG dissemination is the Indonesian mega project that converted 50 million households from the use of paraffin to LPG between 2007 and 2011. The program succeeded in reducing extreme energy poverty and saved on domestic fuel expenses and paraffin subsidies. India has made comparable headway in paraffin substitution as well, with subsidy-supported LPG and electricity. South Africa's own exploration of LPG diffusion, despite misperceptions about affordability and safety, has itself provided encouraging results on user satisfaction and the catalyzation of local value chains. What is needed in South Africa is greater government commitment to LPG rollouts across the country and expedited electricity connections in unreached indigent households. A South African call to action. In February 2021, ASIF, the Academy of Science in South Africa, partnered with UNISA and drew on the current evidence for a safe energy campaign under the banner of a No Paraffin campaign. The campaign calls for an accelerated transition to safe, affordable, and modern energy that prioritizes the needs of impoverished communities. The campaign is directed at 3 elements: the immediate reduction of health risks to the poor through phasing out of paraffin as a domestic fuel. Secondly, strengthen protections for paraffin users during this phase out. And thirdly, the scaled up implementation of a modern energy alternative, either electricity or LPG, but possibly other locally proven and feasible energy alternative. The campaign advocates, therefore, for the expedited modern energy transition in the country. It recognizes the challenges experienced with the domestic use of paraffin and calls on more stringent measures to manage its use, while at the same time advancing efforts to implement either electrification or, where this is not suitable, a safer and cost-effective alternative. The campaign will be contingent on a number of critical factors. These include government leadership and championship, political commitment to provide safe energy, empirically, locally produced information, public mobilization and support, and a regularized communication strategy. The impact of past initiatives have been maximized with partnerships between government, civil society, and local community actors, also researchers and industry or corporate consortia. The call to government is an important one. Government's role is important. It is expected to play a central one in this national campaign. Past initiatives have been maximized where government has forged the partnerships with other parties. Political championship and commitment to energy policy transformation will be required, especially when it is necessary to ensure significant scaling up. This will need to be through the provision of appropriate government structures and budgets, with the relevant government entity actioning both near and longer-term measures. Government does have a model for such implementation. The District Development Model, or the DDM, currently coordinates government's response to the interconnected challenges of poverty and may be an appropriate government focal point for the implementation of this campaign in local communities. The DDM was just recently launched in 2019 to coordinate government's response to the challenges of poverty, of unemployment and inequality, and accelerate and integrate service delivery. The DDM would therefore provide, initially, a small-scale platform as a real-life site for the testing, evaluation, and demonstration of new technology, and to establish context-specific safe energy service delivery. A coordinated, phased rollout plan would therefore, after the near-term, interim, and short to medium-term measures are simultaneously being attended to, enable the transition away from hazardous fuels. A number of key near-term measures are required, and these focus on hazard control and removal. The campaign calls on the South African government to implement a number of specific policy and implementation recommendations to strengthen hazard management and removal for greater public protection while paraffin is being phased out but still in use. These follow established public health measures. There are 4 of them. Firstly, noting the heavy burden of paraffin stove failure, manufacturers of such stove are to strengthen efforts to ensure that domestic products comply to prescribed design and construction standards, with increased support for enforcement authorities to increase verification activities and curtail the manufacture, distribution, and use of risky substandard appliances. Secondly, the current compulsory paraffin stove standard should be urgently reviewed to address shortcomings and ensure enhanced protection of stove users while paraffin is still in use. Thirdly, the SABS, the South African Bureau of Standards, is urgently called on to formulate a standard that prescribes the addition of a bitterant to paraffin to reduce cases of accidental poisoning. And finally, safety educational campaigns are necessary to disseminate information on safe stove use behaviors and emergency responses in the event of either poisoning or fire accident. This could be achieved through agreements around compulsory stove and paraffin packaging information to be used by energy technology and fuel suppliers. There are a number of short to medium-term measures also recommended, and these focus on engagement with stakeholders, policy, implementation, and monitoring. The South African government is called on to prioritize, develop, and enact a substantive policy on safe energy provision, alongside interventions to support regular household incomes and suitable housing. Key elements include, and there are 5 of these: an engagement strategy to facilitate public interest in the transition plan for the affected communities and the use of the safe energy alternative. This could include a national awareness campaign to highlight consumer rights, the attributes of replacement appliances, and their safe domestic use. Secondly, the publication of a white paper to specify the milestones, the timelines, and the necessary mechanisms for the gradual phase out of paraffin, and the introduction and upscaling of the chosen energy alternative. The SABS is called on to set the design and construction standards for the approval of domestic appliances suitable for use with all approved domestic energy appliances. The development of supportive infrastructure to support energy user access, including strengthened distribution networks, financial support, and incentive systems for energy acquisition. And finally, monitoring and evaluation to determine the readiness of local users to adopt alternative energies, to identify implementation issues, to assess household energy technology and usage patterns, and report on safety, health, and cost outcomes. What is the way forward? Immediately, there is further research that does need to be conducted, especially locally, and these include the implementation of locally representative field studies that can measure the comparative impact of the different energy carriers and their appliances. There is a requirement for local case studies of LPG, methanol, and solar, and these could comprise retrospective and prospective reviews of implementation experiences, specific consideration of experiences of removal of unsafe stoves even where electrification is in place would be a priority. Cost-benefit analysis of the adoption of the new energy is also recommended. The institutional requirements for effective implementation of the alternative energy, including distribution, packaging, affordability, and enforcement demands, are all critical. These likely played a significant role in the failure of paraffin being used in more effective ways. Finally, public and community receptivity to enable both early and sustained adoption is also important. The second element of the way forward is the engagement with key stakeholders. I've indicated the recent national webinar series that looked at the extent of the problem, the alternative energy solutions, and the requirements for an energy transition. Going forward, there will need to be discussions with national clean energy legislative forums such as the SABS technical committees, the National Disaster Management Advisory Forum, and others. The integration of the No Paraffin campaign into existing community safety or poverty alleviation intervention models has been spoken about, and its implementation in the next phase is a priority. Finally, the way forward with respect to public awareness and information dissemination. Household energy safety messaging is important and has been in development for a little while. The UNISA ISHS is an example where such messaging has been created and even adapted to convey safety practices within the COVID-19 health pandemic. A national dissemination of such a campaign and the general household energy safety messages will be required through the public mass media to especially coincide with winter seasons when most fires and injury events are reported. Colleagues, in conclusion, this campaign is aligned to the UN's 2030 Sustainable Development Goal on the universal access to safe and sustainable energy. This campaign is cognizant of the current indications of the scale and impact of energy impoverishment and the recent international and increasingly local emergence of energy alternatives that may be feasible for South Africa. I want to end on this note. This campaign calls for 4 elements, and it's an important campaign for South Africa. It does call, and I repeat this, for championship and commitment from government, but also from civil society, from the university sector, and from industry. The energy problem in South Africa is a countrywide, population-wide problem and requires significant collaboration to address. The campaign calls for ongoing local research into the impact and cost effectiveness of alternative energy. The evidence for what works is critical and is critical to the adoption of alternatives by South Africans. Thirdly, there will need to be scaled up implementation either of electricity or LPG or a third suitable alternative, and this is especially for those homes that have been on the margins and off-grid for one or other reason. Finally, we do need a plan. We need a plan with clear milestones to record progression towards a more energy safe and inclusive future. The 2030 guideline by the UN is completely feasible for South Africa. Colleagues, I thank you for your attention and thank you for joining this session.
The Vice Chancellor and Principal, Professor Puleng Lenkabula, Professor Meiwa, Professor Masemole, Professor Sidat, and the man of the moment, Professor Ashley van Niekerk. Greetings to one and all. Distinguished colleagues, Prof. van Niekerk and family and guests, it's indeed a great honor to have been asked to respond to Prof. Ashley van Niekerk's presentation at this special occasion in his professional life. I have come to understand his world of research and his contribution to science via 3 webinars we hosted at the Academy of Science of South Africa in conjunction with other stakeholders on the No Paraffin campaign. In addition, Prof. van Niekerk, together with ASAF, used the discussions and deliberations from these webinars to publish an ASAF statement that went out on the 27th of July, hunting for the No Paraffin campaign. Ashley's contribution to sciences mirrors that of the mandate of the Academy of using evidence-based science in the service of society. Colleagues and guests, I am sure you would agree with me, having listened to Ashley's presentation, where he highlighted the multifactorial nature of the problem as evidenced from the title of his presentation, Energy Impoverishment and Burns, a case for an expedited, safe, and inclusive energy transition in South Africa. Before I present to actually address his presentation, colleagues, I just want to remind one and all that claims for the earliest definitive evidence of control of fire by a member of the Homo species ranges from between 1.7 to 2 million years ago. Evidence for this microscopic traces of wood ash as a controlled use of fire was first noted by Homo erectus at the beginning, in the era 1 million years ago. Every culture since the dawn of our humanity has found a use for fire. Fire brought into our culture advances in tool-making skills, as evidenced at Pinnacle Point in the Cape, where at the period over 100,000 years before present, our early ancestors were making use of fire to make tools that they were using in their normal subsistence and lifestyles. We use fire for cultural rituals, prayer, for example, like lighting of lamps in the Hindu custom, or candles by other faiths, when we take marriage vows and other prestigious and landmark occasions in our life. So fire has been with us, and that glow of light, the significance of hope, of a new morning, new beginnings, all kind of gives us that warmth from issues related to light and fire. Sadly, though, however, as in many other instances, whenever there are good episodes, there are also harms. Prof. Niekerk's presentation has highlighted that with respect to how he has presented to us the crucial problems. What Ashley has done in his presentation is almost like onion science technology. He has brought together facets pertaining to health, the socio-economic well-beings of society, the environment, healthcare issues, the plight of poor, and many, many other issues, including, for example, environment and gender-related issues. I like to use this kind of metaphor of onion layering, because every layer is part and parcel of the whole. And for us to understand the complexities of burns and what its impacts are on society, we have to see this in an intersectional sort of way. Ashley has demonstrated to us the high risks with respect to pediatric cases. Young kids ingest paraffin, presenting with several clinical problems. Burns, the scarring, and imagine the social implications of a young person growing up with burn scars going into adulthood, etc. How often have we looked at people or given a second look when we've noticed images of burn? So these are all because of fire. And in this instance, we are talking about the kind of almost mandatory use of paraffin as a source of fuel to the poor and the poorest of the poor. We also have heard about the risks to health to exposure of toxic fumes, poisoning, and burn injuries. We were informed that annually over 100,000 burn injuries are reported in this country. It may seem trivial, but if you compound it with the other side effects of this problem, you then realize what the repercussions of all of this is. Turning our attention to the socioeconomic aspects of this scenario posed by the use of paraffin. Well, I am privileged that I could just turn on a light switch and get light. And we all know how we squeal and shout and scream when we are subjected to load shedding or what is called this rotational offage of electricity when municipalities turn off our power. Now imagine when you don't have that. Imagine if you also don't have the money or the resources to pay for these increasing costs of electricity that we are being subjected to. So how do you subsist? How do you fend for your family? Well, you will have to use alternate means of obtaining this energy for basic needs. And sadly, one of the cheapest options at hand is paraffin. And we have heard from the presentation that in some cases, treatment for burns range from between 100,000 to 150,000 per individual. And I mean, we've got evidence for some of the estimated annual costs ranging in the billions. So this is a significant problem, colleagues. And unless we all become aware and propagate for awareness against this, we will not be, lessening the burden of the problem. With respect to the environment, we all sat in disgust and sadness as we watched the recent fires in the Cape kind of engulf parts of the prestigious library at the University of Cape Town. Seminal literature dating back to eons have just gone poof in a blaze due to fire. And the environment, the richness of the fynbos. What about other fires that happen throughout the world with runaway fires sometimes due to natural phenomena like lightning, but other times through the negligence of humans. And then we are affecting this environment that we share as human subjects. We affect the environment of animals who do not have other means of ensuring their environments, etc. So it's up to us to facilitate and to propagate for all of this. And not to mention the impact that this carbon fumes, etc., have with respect to climate change. I mean, we will all remember the discussions that are ongoing in our contemporary lives around the issues to climate change and why we need to be more aware of these things. So Ashley's talk also shed light on the effects of fire with respect to environmental areas of discussions as well. I want to also move our attention to the plight of women. It is, in fact, Women's Month. And while we celebrate women, we also need to pause and look back at the role of women, not only in science, but in that entire landscape of society. So who are the people first at risk, be it health or otherwise? It's the women, because the women are the members in our society who are caregivers. It's the women whose responsibility it is to provide the foods on the table, to tend for the young and the old. And if there is a problem with your paraffin-lit sources of energy, these are the first people who are in line to inhale the fumes and sustain burns and injuries as a result of this. So here and again, I want to bring in that sort of multifaceted, the health, the social, and the economic well-being of society. And again, Ashley's talk has driven us to focus on these sorts of issues. Now, I also want to punt and add my voice to the call for the No Paraffin campaign, which was launched in 2021. We all have to contribute to this. We all have to seek alternatives for clean energy. And how do we do it? We do this by advocacy and by lobbying. We may not be the ones who, in fact, will be the people changing the policy, but if we aggregate our resources, if we come together as a society and lobby hard, we will be able to effect policy changes and paradigm shifts that we all aspire to in supporting the Sustainable Development Goals for ensuring a cleaner environment and future for all and sundry. As I speak to this, I'm also reminded of a very important agenda that's going on in the country and that the Academy has also been adding its support to. And that's the just transition. It's a transition from moving from coal use as a source of energy to other cleaner alternates. Yes, we want that for the betterment of society. But how do we do it in a just way so that we empower the people who are presently dependent on the use of coal from the mining, etc., to be able to transpose to newer technologies as they come into operation, etc. So we also have a responsibility as academics and part of that wider society to ensure that there's a reasonable, just transition, leaving no one behind, so that we can all move together as a collective in the direction that befits us all. Ashley has also spoken to us about the near-term interim measures for hazard control and removal, and has also spoken to us about the medium-term measures for engagement, policy implementation, and monitoring. And I just want to echo my support for his perseverance around these issues, and want to add that as from an academy perspective, we would gladly support such initiatives. Lastly, colleagues, I just want to say that this sixth administration of government is very strongly punting for the district development model. And as we look at the problems that affects us at a societal level, we realize that we are first individuals, we are niched in a family, we have extended families, we are part of a local community. And so the first line of policy intervention comes in at local municipality level. So this is where we need to give greater support to sustain our local municipalities so that whatever measures they put into place can be brought together to have a kind of cascade or rollover effect that moves to the provincial level, and ultimately we can recognize from the bottom-up approach those initiatives that we put in place to build a better future, perhaps not in our generation, but for the future generations to come. Colleagues, it has been indeed a great, great privilege for me to be part of this illustrious academics journey. Ashley, I wish you continued success in whatever it is you are taking forward, because I know you have given the utmost attention to those finer issues that affect us all at a societal level. And I wish you continued publication in this area, and also the way in which your evidence-based approaches kind of intersect on that policy landscape. So be assured that from the Academy of Science of South Africa, we are there to support you and your colleagues and your team and everything that we can join forces to do to provide better outcomes. Thank you very much for your attention, and enjoy the rest of the day. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for the congratulatory remarks that I'm experiencing that are very warm on the chat box. Please get us more and more, and also respond to Prof. van Niekerk's lecture in other ways, through further questions, through recommendations that you make, through any evidence that you want to point him to do his research further. As I'm closing now, I want to say thank you for the comments. Thank you, Prof. van Niekerk, for a very educational lecture, which is an acknowledgement and an argument of the significance of variant forms of energy that takes care and that include the energy impoverished. Thank you for that. And thank you for your family, Prof. Niekerk, who've attended this lecture this morning on a weekday. Thank you, Prof. Sudal, for a very engaging response. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your support on a Wednesday morning. You could have been elsewhere. I express gratitude as I end to every one of you, and am singling out now specifically to the colleagues who will not come to the podium like I've done now, but who've been working behind the scenes to ensure that this lecture, this installation of Prof. Ashley van Niekerk as a full professor is a success. They've worked behind the scenes and they've ensured that you are experiencing this lecture in the best manner that we could have presented to you. You have a good day ahead. We appreciate you. Thank you.